Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. Well, hello everybody. I hope you're all well. Come back to the Avatar Grove, which is an old growth forest on the west coast of Vancouver Island, not far from Port Renfrew. And I'm a little disappointed. I photographed this scene probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. And it's somewhat seasonal, and what I mean by that is that the stream here only really runs when it rains, and if it rains a lot, then obviously you'll get a lot more water. I was here a few weeks ago and there was too much water, so I've come back and there's hardly any water, so it's a little disappointing. Now, having said that, I'm going to try and eat my words here and tell you that I really shouldn't try to have expectations, even though I've driven out to the west coast here in the hopes of photographing this scene here or repeating it with my GFX 100. It's just not going to happen today. But rather than just give up and go and look for something else, I've decided to try and stick it out a little bit and see if I can find a different composition, because you never know, might find something that's even better or equally as nice as what I originally found. The original image is very beautiful, I think, because we have the big old log above the creek here, and it has a big tree growing out of it, so it's a really nice nurse log, and it really represents the old growth forests of British Columbia really well. And of course, having the creek below with mossy rocks and ferns just adds an extra touch to it. But I think what I'm going to do is try to think to myself, okay, so what is it about the scene that really draws me to it? And the reality is, even though the creek is a nice addition, it's actually the big old tree above the creek with that big tree coming out of it that really attracts me to this scene, and also the other log behind it. And of course it's surrounded by conifers that are nice and green, and then you've got the ferns in here as well. The biggest problem that I found with this area here is that as you may see from this video, very dark in here. The ISO of the camera right now is at ISO 3000, and that's at f4. Now I'm shooting at a 60th of a second, but it's extremely dark in here and it presents some challenges. One of the biggest challenges being that if there's any wind in here, then you're going to get blurry foliage. And so that's one concern. Now I could boost the ISO, that's not a problem, but of course as soon as I start adding a bit of depth to that, then you kind of mitigate that faster ISO because you need the depth. So you end up still shooting slower shutter speeds. I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to see what I can find. I think I have something in mind, maybe a pano of just the logs above. This tree here I'm not keen on. It kind of gets in the way a bit, so I'm going to have to kind of maneuver around to try and find an angle that works for me. The other problem that I have with, and this kind of happens with a lot of forest photography, is that I'm kind of shooting upwards, so I'm getting big patches of white sky in the background. So if I can elevate myself a little bit, that will help, because I'll be able to shoot across rather than up. And that might be possible here because just behind the camera there's a steep slope. I just noticed there's a little bit of fog moving in as well, so that might help a little bit as well. So let me set up and we can see if we can salvage something out of this shoot today. All right, I think this is going to work. So what I've done is I've just moved down a bit further, so I'm not so close to the scene that I want to photograph. And by doing that, I'm shooting more straight across at the scene rather than up. And I've talked about that a few times. What that means is that I end up using a slightly longer focal length, and that way you're able to eliminate the sky as much as possible. It is very dark in here, but the wind, there's a little bit of wind. Let's just see what I can do. I really don't like that one alder that's kind of in the way. There's not really much I can do about that. All right, so I've set up here, and I really love the angle, but as you can see, this alder here is a little bit kind of in the way. And even though I like the angle and I've eliminated the sky, one of the biggest problems with this composition is that this foliage on the left side is kind of blocking the part that I really love about this scene, and that's the tree, or the large tree growing out of the nurse log here. So somehow I'm going to have to change my angle so that I'm including more of that tree. And that's the thing with composition, you have to really define what it is you're trying to portray, and then simplify it. And if you see a problem, or you kind of have a feeling that something's not quite right, then usually your intuition is probably the best way to go about composition. If it doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't right. This tree to me is really bothersome, so I'm going to try and find another angle so that I'm not including it. My initial kind of approach to this was to have a wide angle view of the scene, but as you can see, it presents some other problems. The biggest one being this log on the right side. It's really quite distracting, mainly because it's so bright, doesn't have any bark on it, and it doesn't really lead your eye anywhere other than out of the frame. So I've eliminated that by zooming in, but then that creates some other problems. So I'll take this shot the best I can, and then I'll try and find another composition that I think better represents what it is I love about this scene, and that's the big tree growing out of this fallen giant.
As predicted, this photograph didn't quite work out for many of the reasons that I pointed out in my video. For most of my compositions, I really do like to use my instincts as a guide as to whether a scene will work out as a photograph or not. Now, that's not to say that I go against those instincts now and then and think outside of the box or try something different, because if we're always doing the same thing, then how are you going to improve as an artist? So it's not a bad thing to, you know, if something doesn't quite feel right, but just go with it anyway, just to see how it turns out and learn from those mistakes, or learn from the things that might work out that you otherwise might not have thought of. In this case, though, I don't think the image works because of the things that I pointed out. at the beginning there, the alder in the foreground is very distracting to me. And also, there isn't really a focal point to this photograph. The tree growing out of the nurse log, for me, is the most interesting part of this scene. And of course, it's hiding behind a tree limb there. Even though we know it's there, or I know it's there because I was standing there, you need to represent that and show it clearly so that your viewers can see those subjects that you're really drawn to. Now, this particular photograph, this is the raw file. I haven't done anything to this, so there are a number of issues with it that I would address, namely just bright areas and dark areas that need darkening or lightening. You could probably see on the left side here, there's a little bit of snow, and that tree branch is very bright, so I darkened that down. I would darken down the right side of the frame and probably lighten the middle there a little bit, and just equalize out the highlights and the shadows a bit more.
All right, so I've moved forward and I'm using a wider lens, and the angle is much better now because I can include the part that's really interesting to me, the big tree coming out of the log. The problem is that now I'm shooting up, so we have to make a few compromises, kind of either crop it a little bit tighter, or perhaps in post-processing do something with those bright areas, either clone them out, or what I did in the last photograph when I was here was I added a little bit of Gaussian blur just to kind of look like it was some kind of light bleed, which some people like and some people don't like. I thought it looked not too bad, but I'll let you guys decide. So it's not the easiest scene to photograph, and of course now it's getting even darker. It's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I'm shooting at ISO 1600, f10, and I have a shutter speed of 1.5 seconds, which is problematic because some of the ferns are moving.
Okay, now I think most of you would agree that this image is a much cleaner and more defined version of the scene than the first photograph. We've now defined what it is we really want to show in the scene and zeroed in on it, and just keep simplifying and simplifying until we get to the point where we've eliminated as much of the distraction as possible, and we just have those bare elements. You'll notice that the alder is still in the frame, but it's kind of to one side, so it's still a little bit distracting, but not as distracting as the first photograph. You can now see that we have that beautiful tree growing out of the stump, and we also have the fallen log in the background that mimics the one in the foreground. So it's much more defined. Now this again is a raw file. I didn't process this image because, as you'll see in the rest of the video, I went back and I think I had better conditions. Incidentally, this was shot at ISO 1600, and I can't believe how noiseless this scene is. There's very little difference between a photograph taken at ISO 100 and 1600, which just blows my mind. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that.
Right, I've decided to camp out, and some of you may recognize this spot. This is not far from where I was, Avatar Grove. It's quite quiet down this area. Eden Grove is down there, and then this grove of trees that I've photographed a couple of times now. I don't think it has a name, but I really enjoy just camping out here. It's getting pretty cold though. Incidentally, I have a new pair of gloves that I should mention. These are the Valerie photography gloves. These are the Markov Pro 2s, and I've been using the Valerie gloves for a couple of years now, and what I like about them is they're quite versatile for photographers, or they're made for photographers. These are the gloves. Obviously I have mitts as well for colder weather, and when it's colder out, what I usually do is I have the mitts and then I'll have the inner gloves. They have a merino wool, or you can get some kind of like a synthetic pile inner glove as well if it gets really cold. These are kind of a mid-range, mid-winter glove. This year on the island it hasn't been very cold at all, and I haven't had a need for gloves. As you can probably see, there's a little bit of snow around, and the temperature has dropped, so I've decided to bring these along with me. The nice thing about the Valerie gloves is that they have the magnet on the thumb and the forefinger here, so that you're able to you know, touch the dials on your camera, just have a little bit more control with your fingers, so you don't have to keep taking your gloves off all the time, which is what I used to do. It was you know, it'd be a pain in the butt, especially when it's really cold out. These are a thin slate glove. They also have a little pocket at the back here. I guess you could store stuff in there if you want, or I think you might be able to fit in a hand warmer in the back there, so that's kind of handy. Has a nice grippy palm. It's kind of like a, it's not leather, it's some kind of rubberized texture, so when you're holding your tripod or anything like that, it's really quite firm in your hands. Nice elastic cuff. The insulation is thin slate, so it's warm when it's wet. Yeah, they seem like they're pretty good gloves. They're very well made. So if you're interested in checking these out, I'll leave a link down below for you to go check them out. And if you're left-handed as well, they have the same thing on the left hand, so the lefties don't get left out. Right, I'm going to finish making my cup of tea. It's going to be a long night tonight. I don't know why it's so dark. Probably just dark clouds today. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get a little bit of light. All right.
Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you're in the market for a professional looking website, then look no further. Squarespace has some of the classiest website designs that I've come across. A Squarespace website is easy to set up and intuitive to use. Squarespace's all-in-one platform is an exceptional choice for photographers wanting to showcase their masterpieces to the world and also sell their services and products. Want a free trial? Head over to squarespace.com and give it a go. And if you like it, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase.
Well, good morning everybody. Looks like we had a bit of snow last night. Oh, I thought it was a bit nippy. So I spent the night not too far from here, down on the logging road here, and the light is still pretty dark out, so I'm gonna go back to Avatar Grove and give that a go. I really wish that the snow had come down a little bit lower so that I could take some photographs of the snow on the trees down low. But I do have a solution to that, and that is the drone. I think what I'm going to do is get the drone out and see if I can get some shots of the trees up high. I'd like to get a shot actually just looking down on the trees. I know it's been done to death, but I really like that perspective, just looking right down on the trees all covered in snow. It's more or less just a pattern shot, you know. This is a lovely scene. Now, I have photographed this before in the past. When we were running workshops, I used to bring people up here, and often we would stop at this scene here. I think what's really great about it is that it feels a bit more open than the rest of the forest because we're on the edge here. The road is not too far from the edge here. It also gets a little bit of fog, as you can see. So let's just see if we can capture that fog, because the forest behind me, this section behind me doesn't really get much fog at all. So the fog comes rolling in through the valley and will often kiss the side of this hillside here. So you get this ethereal looking forest. There is a little bit of fog in there now, but I really wish we'd get this same atmospheric haze or fog in the back section here, because there's some really beautiful trees in here, but when there's nothing to separate them, it just looks way too busy. But this is really nice, and what I like about this is there's a broken off tree that's really quite red. So it adds a bit of color. We've got the reds and the greens and then the fog rolling in. Now for this composition, I've decided to go really wide pano, because I just love the bases of these trees with the green salal. Yeah, it's a really lovely scene. There's another big tree down here that I've tried to photograph a number of times, and I just can't seem to get a great angle on it. One day I'll come down here and I'll find a good angle on it, but I don't know, for whatever reason I just can't seem to find anything that really that I'm really happy with. Right, I'm just going to keep taking a few more shots of this, and then I'm going to head back up to the place where we were yesterday. Well, I was just on my way up to the spot where I was yesterday, and I thought I'd give this a go. I've looked at this scene quite a few times. Basically what's happening here is this is just erosion from people actually walking up to these big trees, and over time the topsoil just kind of washes away. But I really love these roots in the foreground, so I thought I'd give it a go. Now there is a bit of a convergence there with the trees because I'm using a relatively wide lens. In this case it's 32 millimeters on medium format, so I'll probably just straighten that up a little bit in Photoshop. There is a lot of white in the top, but I think that might be, I think that might be okay. I might just brighten it right up to kind of give the illusion that it's fog, or if that doesn't work, then I'll crop it to a pano, just so that I'm including all of these roots here, and then there's this massive great western red cedar in the background. I think it might work out okay. I mean, it would be great if there was a little bit of that atmospheric fog in there, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Anyway, it's even if it doesn't work out, it's a great reference for next time I'm here. If the composition works and it's just all, you know, about coming here when the light is a little bit different, then that works fine too. All right, well, the light isn't really any better, but it is extremely calm out, so at least that's good news. That way I can bring my ISO down, and yeah, the ferns aren't moving at all, so I can extend the shutter speed all the way down to 10 seconds or so, which is great. Because this tree is in the foreground, definitely going to need more depth. If that tree wasn't there, then I wouldn't have to stop down as much, because it looks a bit odd if that's out of focus, and I don't want that really to be just in focus and everything else behind it out of focus. There's also just on my right an evergreen limb coming down that's quite far forward as well. So I do need quite a bit of depth here. It's too bad the water wasn't running a bit better, because actually the conditions right now are just perfect. So I'm going to set up right where I am, because as I said yesterday, I really want to be able to get that tree growing out of the log going over the creek here. And also the log in the background is very important as well. If I try to move the camera over to my left, over to the left here, to try and avoid these trees, then the whole scene just looks off balance to me. So again, what I'm going to try and do is do a bit of a pano, because the creek at this point, it's kind of, it's not really, there's nothing really there to photograph, just a little trickle. But the logs themselves are really quite something. Right, I'll set up, and the compositions are going to be more or less the same as yesterday. So I'll show you those right now. All right, I think I'm more or less done here. I've taken a number of variations. I even put on my 23mm lens, which is the widest lens that I have, and did a pano of just the nurse log with that tree growing out of it. I think it might turn out okay. I'm really glad that I did come back, because with that wind yesterday, it was a bit of a challenge, and especially being so dark. A little bit lighter today, no wind, so I'm happy with that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. And as always, if you have any comments or suggestions, be sure to leave them down below. You may have also noticed that in the last little while, I've been putting up prints at the end of my videos. I'm going to be trying to do that more frequently. I absolutely love printing. It's just the last 2 or 3 years I haven't done an awful lot, because I've been concentrating more on the YouTube side of things. But now that I have my office more or less set up and the printer all ready to go, and of course I've been printing the 50,000 subs sale, or the recent sale that I had. So if you are interested in purchasing a print, be sure to head on over to my website. I'll leave a link up here. It's an ongoing thing, so if there is an image that you've seen in the past that you wish was on the list or on my website, be sure to let me know. All right, everybody, thanks ever so much for watching again, and until next week, bye-bye.